Hello there. Today we are going to see how to work with REST API test requests in Postman tool. So Postman is an open source tool where you can download in Postman downloading page. You can either download the desktop version as well as they have their web version available for free. So I have here is the desktop version. So this is how your Postman looks. So let's get started. In Postman, you'll find a create new button to get started with your first test request. Let's click. So here we have a lot of options: request, collection, environment, monitor, etc. We are going to see all these options here in this tutorial. The first one we are going to see is collections. So collection is nothing but where we saw a testing REST API in our previous video using SOAP UI. So SOAP UI terms are like creating a test suite and test case. Collection is similar to a test suite, you can say, where it has a collection of test requests and you can execute a single collection together. So first let us create a collection. I am going to use here a public API deck of cards where I used the same API in my other tutorials as well, using SOAP UI as well as in REST Assured. So similarly we are going to use the same API here as well to create test requests in Postman. So I am naming my collection as deck of cards. Click create button and you will see deck of cards is created as a collection under the collections tab. So inside that we are going to create test requests. So I'm going to click add request where I'm going to enter the URL of the page. I'm giving save to deck of cards, which is my collection name. So if you click, you will see the request. So this is how a request tab looks like. Let's decode what it is all about. Here the first option is to select the method. We have so many methods here in Postman, where in SOAP UI we can see fewer methods only. So now we are going to start with the get request. So this is the place where you enter your URL and this send button will actually use to run your request, and we are going to see these sections later. So first let me enter my URL. Okay, I gave my URL here. Let me rename it to new deck. And I'm going to enter this URL here. So this API, we have already discussed enough about this API in our previous videos. Just giving a little overview. This API will create a new deck of 52 cards. We know playing cards. It just simply create a deck of cards. So let me click send. You will see the JSON response where the URL has created a new deck with 52 cards. Each deck will be identified by a unique deck ID. For example, if I again hit send, a new ID will be created like this. So with this ID we can identify the deck. So if you see this section, you will see pretty, raw, preview and visualize. These options are used to see different forms of the output. Here again in the drop down there are a lot of options. We are seeing the output as JSON. So here you created your first test request and executed it. Now we have seen how to create a collection and how to create a request and work on a new test request. Postman provide another option to use the existing projects Postman has already created. For example, if you go to new and create templates, there are lot of REST API projects already created and worked on uh, Postman. So you can search for particular public API here and use it in your projects to practice. Next we are going to see a query parameter. Before that, let us see the scenarios that API provides. Our first scenario is create a deck, which is what we have done. We are not passing any values through the URL, just calling new so that it creates the new deck. So another way to create a deck in this API is with this URL. What this URL does is, like the previous request, it again creates a new deck, but there is a new parameter here. Deck count is passed. This deck count decides how many number of cards should be created in a deck. For example, if the deck count is 1, like in the previous example or test request, on 52 cards deck will be formed. Here we are passing the deck count as 2, so 104 cards will be formed, like double of this 52 cards. So to pass this, we are going to use query param. Let's see how to do this in Postman. So here if you see, there is a section called query params. First let me check the URL. The URL is new shuffle. To actually create a deck. So now the parameter here is deck count, right? So deck count, and the value is 2. So if you see, the deck count is being reflected here in the endpoint. So let me run this, and you can see there are 104 cards created in a new deck with a new deck ID. Yes, so this is how you have created a query parameter to pass the value to the URL. So looking at our second scenario, this URL will help us to draw cards from the deck created. So here there are two variables that needs to be parameterized. The first one is deck ID. Here deck ID is used to identify from which deck the cards to be drawn. For that, we need to pass the deck ID from the previously created request to this request. And the second variable is count. In this URL, the count is used to mention how many cards need to be drawn from the deck. We can change the value to retrieve that number of cards from the deck. So let's see how to do that in Postman. So now under our collection deck of cards, we have one request already there, that is new deck. We have executed to get a new deck with a unique deck ID. So now we are going to create our second request, that is draw cards, or simply draw, and save. So open the draw, I'm just clearing it to be clear. Now I'm entering the URL. API deck ID draw. So this is the URL to draw a card. Now we have seen one query parameter after the question mark, that is count, to specify how many cards to be drawn. The value, let's give 2. Now everything is all set, but if you send it, deck ID does not exist because we did not pass the deck ID yet. So we need to pass the deck ID from previous response. So how to do that? The important part to create variables in Postman is environment. Environment plays a major role in handling the variables in Postman. So let's see how to create an environment first. If you click this icon, you will see environment tab and a globals tab. We don't have any active variables in this environment. So let's first create an environment. Click add. I'm just giving the name of the environment as testing environment and giving add. I already have a testing environment, so let's have this testing environment. So here we have created an environment. Now we are going to select the environment. Here in the drop down it will show the environments we have created. We created testing environment. Let's select it. So if you see the environment, there are no variables created yet. So now if you observe, there are different tabs available here. The first one is params tab that we have used already to create a query parameter and pass the value. So let's see about authorization and other stuff later. Let's jump into the pre-request script and test script. These tabs are used to enter JavaScript code where user write the code to do any function he wants to do. For example, the pre-request script, whatever code we write in this tab will be executed before the request is executed, and the test tab will allow us to write a code where it will execute after the response is created. For example, this tab will execute after I click the send button, the request hit the server, response is retrieved, and then the code will be executed. Now in our code we are going to read the response JSON and get the value of deck ID and create a variable in our environment to use it in the draw request. Let's see how to do it. I'm going to write a simple JavaScript code to retrieve the response from the JSON. I am declaring a variable response JSON to read the response from the JSON. To do that, pm.response.json. Yes. So now I'm reading the response and storing it in the variable response JSON. The second one, I'm going to set a environment variable, that is pm.environment.set. I'm going to give the variable name as deck ID, and I'm going to get the data from the JSON response. So here response JSON stores all our values. So I'm using this thing dot deck ID. So it is deck underscore ID here. So what I've done, I just from the response JSON I'm retrieving the value of deck ID and setting a environment variable in the name deck ID. Okay, so if you want further to know about the code, you can check our blogspot. I have mentioned the code in the description. Also, Postman provides already defined code snippets in the right side for us to easy access of the code. For example, I want to create an environment variable. Just click on the snippet. It will provide us, get a environment variable. It just provide us a code snippet. For example, get a global variable. It provide the basic syntax. See, now we have set an environment variable. Let's click set an environment variable. When I click this, the same code has reflected pm environment set variable key and variable value. This is what we have done. By this way also you can use to write code easily. So now now if we check our test environment, there is no variables created. I am going to run this request to see whether the variable created or not. The request is executed. Now the deck ID is 55HY-H0 dot dot dot. Now let's check the environment. If you see, the variable deck ID is created, as well as the same deck ID is reflected here. So successfully we have created a variable deck ID and stored its value. You can do this manually as well, just by clicking the test environment and add the variable manually and paste the manual value and use it later. But this is more efficient method where you don't have to do it manually every time. You can automate it. So now we are going to pass this deck ID in this request. So there is a way to do that. There is a way to access a variable in Postman. How is that? Is double braces, variable name, double braces. So it automatically showed in green color, that is environment variable E deck ID. If it is wrong, it will show in red color the variable is not available. Let's change the name and check. See, unresolved, it is showing unresolved variable because I removed the underscore. So the name should match the name which is in the test environment. So now we have parameterized the deck ID. So let's run the request now. Yes, the request executed successfully, and as I said, 2 cards are retrieved. That is, under cards, the code 2s. 2s is 2 spades. See the value. And AC is ace clubs. So there were 104 cards remaining in the first request. If you see, you could see 104 cards remaining. Now we have drawn 2 cards, so there are 102 cards remaining. Let's change this to 3. I am going to draw 3 more cards from this deck. So let me send the request. If you see, 9 spades, king spade, and 6 spades. 3 cards are retrieved from 102 cards. Now you could see 99 cards remaining. So our request works perfectly. Now our third scenario, which is discarding cards. Now we have created a deck. We have drawn 2 cards or n number of cards from the deck. Now the third scenario is used to discard the cards we have picked. So in this URL, if you see, deck ID is a parameter that will be passed as before, and cards are another set of parameters that should be these are the cards is the query parameter that should be passed. Let's see how to do this in Postman. Let's add a third request for our third scenario, that is discard. So it is similar to this. So I'm copying this, pasting the URL in discard. So deck ID, deck file, discard, add is the URL. So for this scenario, cards are the query parameter we have seen. Let's get the value of cards from environment. Before, we have added the deck ID via our JavaScript code. Let's add the cards manually. Let me show that as well. Give edit. Here there is an option to create a variable. Enter cards. Let's give the value as a spade. We have to enter the code here and update. So if we see now, the card is created and it has a value. Now, as I said before, to call or use a variable in Postman, we have to use 2 curly braces, cards, See, once I entered the variable, it is showing in green color cards. So now I'm running the request. See, the cards are discarded successfully. There is no error in the response. So now, how to get the now we have drawn 3 cards in our previous request. That is 9s, 6s, and king spade. So I want to discard one of these cards, whichever I got from the previous response. So how to do that? Let's go to tests. Again, read the response. Response j is equal to pm dot response dot json. So this is how we read a response. Now we are going to simply use the code snippet available, set an environment variable where the environment name is cards. So the value is from the response we are going to get what? Let's understand the JSON structure. So here we have first success, deck ID, and then card section started. Inside the cards section, we are having our codes 1, 2, 3, and end remaining is there. So in below card section, inside card section, we can see the codes. So now how we are going to write it? Cards of 0 dot code. That is, we are now going to get 9s as our value, because we have given not 9s, because this is our previous response. If we give the send request, a new response will be generated and again new cards will be drawn. So we are going to take the first card code from the response. Let's execute the request. Now the first card we have got is 9D and second card is 7C. Now see, now let's check whether 9D is reflected. Yes, 9D is reflected in the environment. If we change the cards to 1 and run it, in response our first card is 2D, second card is 9s. Let's see whether it is 9s. Yes, it is 9s, so it is working perfectly. Now in discard, this card will call the 9s because the value is 9s. Yes, it has successfully retrieved the value and executed the request. So this is how we parameterize a REST API URL in Postman. So we have seen the pre-request script and test scripts functions. Now let's see in response. We have body. We already saw there are different options to view our response, and this header will retrieve the header information like the content type and all other header information, endpoint URL passed and other informations in header. What is the test result tab? So test result tab is usually helps us to show whether the test is passed or failed. We did not add any assertion to our test, that is why this is empty. Let's add an assertion to check whether the header response is 200 or not. So if the header response is 200, the test is successful, right? Now I'm going to write a JavaScript code in test tab to check whether the status in header is 200 or not. So I'm going to write pm.test. So the test displays the message response is successful if it satisfies the condition. What condition? Function. I'm gonna write a function pm dot response to have status 200. So I just wrote a test to check whether the status is 200 or not. Now I'm executing the request. See, it is true. So here we are seeing a green color pass button with response is successful. This is the message we passed in our code. So here there are options to show passed, skipped, failed tests. We don't have any test failed, so it is not showing any. So this is how we write assertion and check whether the test is passed or not. That is why this test folder is present here. Now we have created all our requests and the responses had come. Now deck of cards is kind of a test suite where you can run the complete whole collection to make sure all the requests are run inside it. For example, let's run this deck of card collection. For that, click here and click run. A new window opens with options to select which methods we need to execute. I want to run all three methods, so I'm selecting all three and giving run deck of cards, where you will see the result like how many tests passed, failed, and run summary. And there is an option to view console output where you will get to see all consoles. For example, I have imported Postman's project, which is quite a bigger project than what I have done. So I'm just going to run this Postman echo, which I actually exported from Postman itself. It has a lot of methods. Let me run this. See, you will see all the methods which are getting executed. And ended. Here you can see 83 tests passed and 7 failed. And in console you can see the details of the methods passed. In each and every detail the request has handled, and you can see run summary as well, like how many passed, failed and stuff. Here you have two other tabs where it shows only the failed methods and this shows only the passed methods. You can export the results as well. So this is how we execute a complete collection, which is very important. Like, we can execute all the requests together in one place. So now we have manually executed it by ourselves. There is another option in Postman where we can schedule the test execution in Postman server and the results will be populated automatically. Let's see how to do this. Here monitor options are available in every collection. So this is the collection we have created, deck of cards. In that, click on monitors, click on create a monitor. So there are options to select configuration. Here you have an option called monitor run frequency, where you can select how many times or at what time the test should be executed. For example, it has option for hour timer and week timer. Let us give hour timer, and every 2 hours, every 3 hours, every 4 hours I want to run the test twice a day. So I'm giving every 12 hours. Automatically select region, or if you select manually, select region. Okay, that option is not available in free version of Postman. And in additional preferences you can set receive email if run fails and etc. and create. Okay, now the monitor is created. You can view the web results here in web dashboard. If you haven't signed in to your Postman yet, there will be another step to ask you to sign into Postman, otherwise you'll be directly open to this web dashboard. Now we just created the monitor and our tests are not executed yet in our monitor, so there are no results. I have already created a monitor for my previous collection. Let me show that. To run the tests for in every 1 hour, so I have set up the monitor to execute my tests for every 1 hour since yesterday. So these are the reports I can see for every 1 hour, like 5, 6, 7, 8. For every 1 hour the tests are executed and it is showing the results, and twice my tests are failed as well. I can see that in the graph. Failed, percentage, response time, you can see each and every details here. Also, if you click on that particular test, you can see the test results here and a console log as well, that what are all the logs we are given, it will be reflected here, so it is easy for us also to understand why the tests are failed. So this gives the detailed report, and this is how we schedule a test using Postman monitors. So yes, in this video we have seen how to create a new test request, how to create a collection, how to create variables and pass and read the response and pass the value to another request, how to run a collection, and how to set up a monitor in Postman. So if you have any queries, do comment below and check my blog for even more detailed description. Thank you.